What's up, everybody? How's it going? And welcome to this special episode of the Car Rant Podcast. We have not done this in a hot minute, just because life caught up with us. We didn't have the time to sit down and do these kinds of discussions. That said, today we'll be discussing things along the lines of inflation and artificial inflation of cost of parts in the market and how it's affecting the different areas of the car community. And we have a guest. He's actually the one who wanted to do this said discussion, and that is Erik Crossfield. Introduce yourself.
Well, it was indeed my idea. Right off the bat, Porsches are my market, so my pains are greater than yours. No, they're probably not, actually. I have no idea, honestly. But if it were the 1990s, it might be a little better. No air-cooled cars anymore.
Truth.
But now we're watching the same thing that happened to those begin to happen to the 944 and 928 series of cars with the engine in the conventionally correct place.
Being the front.
Yeah.
For those who think that he was mentioning how the Porsches are always in the rear. We also have Ian. He's not been on any of our podcasts before. But most of our market... What is it? Missing market links? That's what it's been that long. Most of those have been from discussions that he and I have shared consistently over the last year and a half. So, more of that to come. I think the next one will be about the Mitsubishi Eclipse and why the crossover was not the best idea. But that's for a different episode. So that said, let's dive right into it. Your qualms are with how some aspects of Porsche ownership are now changing due to people saying things, basically.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things. There's a great generational rift that happens between people, and there's just the conventional, something gets put in the media, this is why blank is a cool car on Jalopnik or whatever, and people see it. Nobody cared about 944 turbos 10 years ago. You could pick one up for $5,000, $4,000. It's a fast car. It's a very capable car. If you put it on the street, it'll probably outdo anything you could possibly think of in the stock configuration.
Yeah, in the hands of a good driver for sure.
Yeah, and same goes for the 928, and the 928's held out a lot longer. But the general gist of things now is we're watching what happened to the air-cooled market happen again. You go online and you look for a 944 turbo now. Well, a good example will run you anywhere from $14,000 to $20,000, and it's
that is Evo money.
No kidding. And it's genuinely kind of strange because you'll look at the parts availability and it's fantastic, and for what it is, it's cheap. NA parts and turbo parts float generally in the same range. OEM, like used parts, are a lot more expensive for the turbos, but the aftermarket has great support. And people familiar with Lindsay Racing and kind of the circuit of the classic Audis as well will see a pattern between the two. Those aftermarket parts are well developed, and there's a great circuit around them. Upgrading MAFs, that stuff, still very easy to do. As a matter of fact, it's actually cheaper and more reliable to upgrade your MAF than try and mess around with the original AFM, which is far too narrowband to make good power with.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, no, it's all about air. It's all about air density and being able to read that. Since air fuel mix, it's a different metering system.
Now,
but I don't want to digress too far into that. So,
well, to give backstory, you mentioned how the air-cooled car market got hyperinflated.
Yeah.
What's the backstory to that?
Well, the backstory, which is all history to me, I'm not old enough to have had the exposure except to my grandfather's black 930.
Let's be honest, most of us are within the 20s bracket here.
Yeah, so
I'm 25, you're 29 now, and you're like 20. So
21, yeah.
21. So
just got my alcohol license.
Oh my god. The point is that we're all within a younger man's bracket. So for us, this is not necessarily experience, but what we've witnessed through other people.
Yeah, but what happened with a lot of the air-cooled cars is they all circulated around for a long time, and eventually, either through media presence or just general realization that these are really good cars, people started hoarding them, collecting them, locking them away, it's very rare you see an air-cooled car on the road anymore, despite there being so many of them in production.
Wasn't it like 1 million units or something like that?
Well, anyway, it was enough to justify seeing more than you do on average. I see maybe one G50 or G60 911 rolling around, maybe, I don't know, like twice a year. And 928s, which we're going back to the water cooled just here as a quick digression, I've seen 2 over the course of living in this area my entire life. And
being the DC area, for those who have not been familiar with where we live.
Exactly, and they've made plenty of 928s as well. But with the air-cooled market, those cars also had the disadvantage in terms of their own longevity of being hard to handle.
Yeah.
Somebody would get a cheap 930 turbo, well, cheap back in the day.
Yeah, I was
that
about to
needed
say.
work. And they'd get it running well enough, but the problem with getting a turbo car running well enough, especially one that's that old, is it's incomplete. You know, when boost hits, it hits like a
truck.
Yeah, like a sledgehammer. Honestly, it throws you in your seat. And because the engine's in the back, most people just aren't familiar with the handling characteristics, so a lot of those cars died in accidents.
Whip oversteer.
Yeah. Seriously.
Citing the MR2 and Corvair on that one. Because they're both notorious for that.
Yeah, and with boost, it's hard to overcome your fear. You just got to keep the thing planted. So a lot of air-cooled cars, NA or not, having the torque that the 3.2s and 3.3s did,
naturally killed themselves off.
Yeah.
Because of poor ownership.
Got wrecked. Wasn't the aftermarket support in terms of body work. And
I mean, it's hard to have body work for cars like that are handmade.
It is.
I know, it's like having an Aston Martin. Oh, hey, I accidentally got a fender bender. There's a ding in it. Well, that's going to cost you $5,000. Why?
Exactly.
Because some dude in Nottingham needs to come out with the smallest hammer to tap that thing back out, and we have to pay for his plane ticket and his knowledge.
Yeah, and so once the market...
And the hammer.
And so once the market for the chassis bottomed out, the parts market couldn't realistically support the amount of chassis that were left. So you make one car out of 2, there's a couple less left, and eventually that process keeps going, and the media coverage comes out, and the car is pretty much locked away in some guy's checkerboard vinyl covered garage, never to be seen in the light of day again.
See, and this is part of the reason why I definitely agreed to do this, is because Ian and I, to digress minorly, we're both Japanese car enthusiasts, very clearly. I being a big Honda fanboy as well as a Mitsubishi guy. Him working for Subaru and then also being a big Nissan fanboy. Mm-hmm. You, on your end of the spectrum, with Nissans, have recently started having a lot of problems. I've been keeping my finger on the pulse a little bit. Chassis that normally would sell for maybe $2,000 over here on this side of the country, being the East Coast, have been selling for $5,000-$6,000 because of drift tax, but also people artificially boosting the market. We're not going to name drop anybody here because we're not about that in this podcast. But the point is, we know people that have had cars that realistically should have only have sold for $5,000-$6,000, but that's with everything in it. But are asking for almost 10. I, being the Evo guy, there are cars, on average, an Evo should really only cost about $10,000 to $12,000 for the 8s and 9s. I know that people are laughing at that because even I myself spent more to get it. But some of that is it holding its actual value. And then some of that is because people have this unrealistic expectation for the car. We know of a car that sold at a dealership recently. When I say recently, last 3 months, for $42,000 because it was fully kitted out, it was fully built. The stuff that was on it was unrealistic to begin with as far as the cost goes, and it needed work. I remember looking at the car, and stuff was faded. Some parts of that body kit were actually kind of coming apart a little bit.
Oh, that was the Team Orange kit.
Yes.
Okay.
So finding out that car sold for that much money when realistically it's only worth about $20 at best.
I wouldn't have paid $20 for it.
Yeah,
because of everything that was in it.
There was too much, and because of that, it hyperinflated parts of the market so that now even wrecked cars are selling for way more than they should. Mm-hmm. A very, still relatively nice example of an Evo 9 that had flood damage sold for, I think it was $8,000 and $9,000 on a pick your part kind of website.
Yeah.
Where it was a full shell is just a record title because of flood damage.
Yeah, you showed me that.
Yeah.
But
That
a title's
car,
a title, and Virginia will recognize that.
there's that. But it's the fact that it cost almost $10,000 after everything was said and done for a wrecked shell. Granted, yes, you could probably make it work, but the fact that the market itself pushed it that far when that shell was no better than $3,000 because of flood damage meant you had to get rid of all the interior. You have to completely redo the transmission because those things rust pretty fast if they're not filled with oil, which in this case it wasn't. And that's an iron block, which means that you have a lot of tearing down you have to do and rebuild.
Yeah.
And they
Bearings
spent
are gone.
$10,000 for a black Evo 9 that was in this condition. That's hyperinflation.
Yes.
How has this affected the Nissan community? Because you're much more plugged into that than I am.
Well, as far as the Nissan community goes, 240 market, everybody knows it's hyperinflated.
Drift tax.
Well, it's not even a drift tax now. There's a guy there's a dealership actually in Pennsylvania that has
Just as an example.
it's a S14. The paint is faded, chipped. It is not pretty at all. There's a boost gauge sitting in the middle of the
Center console.
center. Yeah, we'll go with the center console
Or I guess
over the
the-
steering wheel. Right,
Right up
so it's
cluster.
blocking your speedometer and stuff. There's just a lot of things about it that are poorly done.
We call those baby monitors.
And it's a stock SR20 swap, unknown miles, unknown everything. No name coilovers, and it's going for $15,000 at a dealership. And somebody on that post actually made a comment about how that's technically market rigging. It's just legal.
It is. And I can tell you why. Because bone stock variations of this same car imported from Japan, right-hand drive, which means origin market.
Go for 10.
And they're all original.
And they're fully original with less than 70,000 miles on them. We know this because of places like Japanese Car Classics, based out of Richmond, who have a few models like that for sale right now. Which, one of these days, we'd love to get a car from them, because that would be really fun. And you look at stuff like that and go, how is this going to kill us or make us break later on in the future? Because that means that the self-same parts that were in that car,
Yeah.
someone will go, well, if that's how much they're selling the car for with these parts in it, maybe I can jack my prices up a little more. And we've seen some brands do that. We have seen brands do that. I don't remember the names. Maybe you remember?
As far as aftermarket?
Yeah, where they've jumped the cost because they see that people are willing to pay for it.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you've definitely seen
Oh God,
it.
you've got a captive market. There's no reason I should pay. There's no reason I should pay $400 to $600 for a clutch pack. There's no reason for that. Performance components for a 944 turbo. You want a pressure plate that is stage 1? $700 for just a pressure plate.
Mind you, we're talking about a 35-year-old car.
Exactly.
So,
But even so, you look at the price of a domestic car, and I suppose there is a level of, apples and oranges to this. Yeah. You buy a clutch pack for a diesel truck, an F-150 or something like that. It's like $150 or like $70 in the case of a Bronco 2 clutch, and that's what a lot of people do with 944 turbos. Psst. So
you heard it here.
Yeah, modify your discs. Put a Bronco 2 clutch in it. But because you have a captive market, and you figure everybody who's making these parts can conspire with one another. All those corporate entities say we can all profit more by all leveling our prices up for people who we know need parts and can't use, because that's an expendable component. You can't get a used clutch disc. There's no point in that. It's not going to hold whatever kind of power you want to make for very long.
Or even if it's stock.
Yeah.
It's just not going to hold because it's already been broken in by a different plate and flywheel and everything.
Exactly. And granted, the pressure plate I'm talking about for $700 holds 530 foot-pounds, and it weighs 11 pounds, I think. No. It's a little lighter. Light. Yeah, it's a hybrid aluminum and steel fork
Interesting.
pull clutch, but I digress. The point stands.
You want a great example of this? That for those who are Japanese viewers will appreciate. Your average cost of an alternator, how much is it?
On what?
Just any given thing. American, German, just...
Well,
$100.
For me, it's like 60 to 80.
Okay.
But, you know...
You ready
little
for
different.
this? I was offered a brand new alternator for a Mitsubishi Evo, which a motor that's been around for almost as long. It's actually 44 years, if I remember right now.
Yeah.
$450. $450, not even with any kind of cord charge, just $450.
What are the field wires made out of gold?
I was going to ask if they washed it with white kittens, because I'm like, what in the world? I had to turn it down, obviously, because I'm not spending that much. My alternator is still good. We will need one for his project, but the point is that it's like, how are you trying to pull $400 for a $125 Denso part? Mm-hmm. How?
Ridiculous.
I mean, at that point, you may as well just buy, one of those MSD alternators. You know what I'm
You're
talking
just
about.
slap a GM one wire in it, or some kind of Ford 3G.
I mean, there's no reason. It's an alternator. It's an alternator. It's not creating power. It's just keeping the motor alive.
Yeah, the production cost with shipping and handling and everything that goes into it, materials and labor, is probably less than $50.
You heard it here. And the point that I find very frustrating is that that's just one part. You get into anything else that's about maintenance. I mean, you can spend up to $600 on a water pump for a 4G63 block.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's crazy. I thought mine were bad.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, these are ones with like nicer pieces and better materials, and they won't rust out and stuff like that. But the point is that it's a water pump that you realistically could cast out of aluminum and it would still hold. And yeah, they won't.
Production value that's even less.
I mean, it's just, it goes to show. Now, what doesn't help is the fact that the Evo as a car was considered a limited market item, or a limited edition for those of you who don't speak that kind of term, which means that stuff for it will be expensive, but I mean, we're talking 400% of the cost value.
Yeah.
Right?
It
Your model of car wasn't exactly a limited edition thing. They had limited editions of it, right? Because special variations and all that
Turbo
stuff.
S, Silver Rose.
Yeah, but a lot of those still share a lot of the same basic components as your standard model.
Yeah, the Turbo S, the only difference, ECU was the same, only difference, bigger hot side on the turbo. Spooled a little earlier and spooled better closer to redline. That's it. It's the Silver Rose, I can justify it a little more, but I saw a regular Turbo S, white, good, not concours, but very close, sell for $76,000. I believe that was a bring-a-trailer. And
that would be why.
Everything I could be mistaken. I could be mistaken, but if it was a Silver Rose, okay, I can justify maybe taking, $20,000 off that price. But where is all this coming from? $76,000 is half of a house.
For a down payment, at least.
In a good-sized house. And remember, we're in Northern Virginia, but go anywhere outside of this county, and it could be a good-sized house.
Anyway, there has been inflation. There are really clean examples of 240s that have gone. I saw one recently. Somebody posted up. I want to say it was about 6 months ago. Clean S14 Kooky, nothing wrong with it. Bone stock, had 20,000 miles on it. And he was asking,
practically a brand new car.
He was asking $15,000 for it. And a lot of people chopped him over the fact that it was bone stock, had nothing done to it. It was rust free and had 20,000 miles on it. And he was basically asking
for dealership cost
at the time.
Yeah.
And I can understand him asking for that price now because there's not as many of those cars.
Yeah. You said this is a Kooky or Zenki?
It was a Kooky.
Okay.
Yeah.
So definitely for me, if I was looking at buying something like that as a collector's item, worth it, 100%. But then I see people selling out modified 240s with unknown mileage and stuff, and they're asking 8, 9, 10.
And we're talking about heavily modified. You have to remember that in the car market, as close to stock as it gets, that's where your money's at. If you start going outside of that stock value, that's when you're going to run into problems selling, especially.
Yeah.
But realistically, you should not be selling it for more than what it actually could be worth. Because once you start modifying it, it's no longer in original condition, and nobody wants it.
I mean,
they'll still want it, but you know what I'm saying when I say no one will want it. It's like, yeah.
Just to bring something up, not going to name names, but I know somebody that had a 240 that he had for quite a while. You know who I'm speaking
of?
Yeah,
I know you're talking about.
Had it for quite a while. Really worked on it. Really, I mean, it was really kind of a rat shell when he got it.
I mean, he probably put in about $10,000 into the car.
Oh, yeah, that was just a shell. That's not even what we consider for motor work. I mean,
that's just to get the car to look decent and actually be functional to a degree.
Yeah, and then he ran through like 2 or 3 SR20s. I think he had 2 or 3 RB25s in it. And just did a lot of stuff with it, and then turned around and sold it for $12,000.
Which
is that worth it for some people? Yes. To those of us who look at that and go, I can go down to the import place and buy an RB25, put that in, and then do what I want to it.
Yeah.
$12,000 is a bit much.
And I think this is one of the two key issues I see with the market as we sit right now, right? We're all into used cars. We're all into older cars. Yours are more German, ours more Japanese. And I think we can speak for the American market as well, saying that some parts for that is still kind of tough to find, as some of these cars are now being rusted out or unfortunately being crashed by people who just don't pay attention. Yeah. I know of a couple of cars that were totaled because somebody was busy texting and driving, or drinking and driving, or just straight up not paying attention, nodding at the wheel kind of thing. Yeah. There was the example, quick story. There's an example of, I want to say it was in Model A. It's either Model A or Model T. Guy spent 10 years restoring it, getting the wood refinished, getting everything back to original spec. It was something that he and his grandfather had worked together on when they were a child, and he never got to finish it, and they really wanted to when he passed away. And a lady on her phone totaled what was pretty much a $1.2 million car because it was restored with all original parts.
Jeez.
A gorgeous car that got totaled because of someone's lack of care to pay attention, stuff like that. It's devastating to hear, but because of stuff like that happening, parts for such cars disappear. Now, yes, that example was a very old car. We're talking early 1900s, but I mean, you want to go back to the 60s, the muscle car era. Mm-hmm. Body parts for Chargers are dumb expensive now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's exactly the same situation we're in now with all of our cars, except it happened 30 years ago. I mean, the story was always, my dad went to high school in a 70 Charger. He bought it for $500 and got it started with a Mountain Dew can full of gasoline down the carburetor. Stuff like that. Yep. And now it's like, instead of $500, it's $50,000.
It's like suddenly there are 2 zeros that used to not be there. Why? Some of it is natural inflation, because our money now is not worth nearly as much as it was then. Yeah. To give an example, I think like an Evo cost about $20,000 new in 2003. Yep. If that same car today was, I think, $44,000, something like that, there you go. Which is a huge amount of inflation. The point is that there is natural inflation through stuff like that, and then there's proliferation inflation, as I would like to call it, through people making videos about them, creating hype around them. We saw that happen with the 240 market, especially when Adam LZ came onto the scene like 4 or 5 years ago. Yep. Because suddenly a very popular BMX bike rider is getting involved in race cars, and he chose one of the most popular at the time amongst the community kind of cars, and then he brought in a whole new wave of people that were never involved in those cars into that community as well. Mm-hmm. That, in turn, jumped the cost through the ceiling. I bought a 240 for $1,000, and it was a decent example. Mm-hmm. It needed to be raised, and we unfortunately had to let it go because we couldn't actually get it to raise because we didn't have any of the hardware. It was a case of bad luck in timing on that one. But that self-same car, 2.5 years later, sold for $4,500 because it was completely straight. It was burgundy red with a decent interior and an uncrashed dash. Yeah. Uncrashed dash. Wow. Uncracked dash. There we go.
So basically, an unmolested chassis.
minus the fact that it was slammed. That was it.
But at the same time, I know we're talking about inflation. In the 240 market specifically, prices were starting to come down a little bit.
Which is interesting, and that was a part I wanted to get to a little later on. So put a pin in that one. It's the fact that, not that kind of pin. It's the fact that, like, time over time, like, because of cars being destroyed and because of new interest coming onto the scene, I mean, one thing that we've talked about is the fact that eventually the 240 shell market is going to be dry.
Yeah.
Yep.
You're just going to have your quarter panels, and your parts market will be really good.
Yeah.
So that's that second half of that bell curve.
But it's the chassis themselves are going to be gone. Because a lot of them have been crashed, have been crushed, have been, you name it at this point, because of the amount of stupid things people do with these cars.
Yeah.
They're all drying out the pool, which in turn, as anyone who's an economist knows, as supply goes down
Demand goes
and the demand remains the same, cost rises, right? If demand were to go down because people found a different chassis to get into, like the 350Z market is about to get hit with this really hard. Okay.
Yeah.
Because as the demand for the market drops, so does everything else, cost. And then the supply will start to rise a little bit, only because it's remaining the same.
Yeah.
In the case of the 240 market, demand is stupid high because everyone wants one because drifty boy things and all of that stuff. But the problem is as that demand has just shot through the ceiling, that curve for supply is completely going through the floor.
Yeah.
And thus the cost is following the demand.
Yeah.
Right? They tend to run parallel. With Z's, they're about to get hit with this already.
Z's and IS300s are going to be the new 240s.
I agree with the IS300, especially because I owned one, and I've watched a bunch of them show up to Drift Nirvana and other events of that nature. They're definitely going to start taking over. Ironically, though, you know what else is going to get hit with that? Our American friends will love this. Older Corvettes. Corvette C3 and C4. Because, well, for one thing, we've seen multiple people already start doing that. I think we saw one or two at the last Drift Nirvana.
Yeah.
And then we also have seen other professional drivers picking up on, like, C5s, like, what's his name? What was it, Matt Field? He's partnered with Odie Bakshi's for Falcon Tire.
I want
to say it's him. Correct us if we're wrong. But the proliferation of American cars back into drifting, I mean, we have seen, what's his name? Ken Block.
Yeah.
Go ham with Ford. He has all the fun toys with that.
Let's be honest, man. That Mustang.
The Hoonicorn? Yeah.
That's.
I think we'd all want a Hoonicorn.
And the Hoona truck, for that matter.
Yeah.
That's my alley.
Unicorn, Hoona truck, his Escorts, his RS200, like they're all really good cars.
Well, but those are German Escorts. We gotta make that little.
Fair enough. It's still a Ford.
The American Escort is kind of
yeah, that's true.
if we're honest, and it's front wheel drive.
You ain't wrong.
That is true.
But to the point of the American Fords, the Fox body. Don't forget that.
Yeah, the Fox
I actually did forget.
It's always been very popular, going in straight lines and going sideways.
Yeah, I did. That is.
I completely forgot about that.
Because when I was at the last Drift Nirvana, I was at when Josh knocked his motor. Anyway, there was
again, no name dropping, but oh well, he'll watch this later.
Gaffreel.
We love you, buddy. There was I think there was 2 or 3 Fox bodies that were out there, and they were all swapped, and they were just ripping it sideways.
And you mentioned that now, and Boosted Bill, if you're watching this, I know you're going to have something to say about this. Because he himself is a Fox Body owner, and he's been trying to find some stuff for it. And he was even thinking about getting another one and starting over at one point.
Do a Capri.
And he straight up was like, they got so expensive out of nowhere.
Yep.
Out of nowhere. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with the fact that the drift community is picking up a lot of the Gen 1s and just doing whatever they can to lighten the chassis and then putting a Coyote 5.0 that you can now buy as a crate motor from Ford directly, or putting in LS1s and LS2s out of trucks, the LM motors and LQ motors.
Yeah.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing the same thing with the 7.3 Godzilla.
Point being, these are cars that we know are now about to get hit with this same problem that we have with the 240s, Evos, and Porsche models.
Which hopefully, I don't wish this on anybody, but hopefully that drops the S chassis market down in price.
Should even out.
I'm tired of overpaying for my $2,000 chassis, okay?
I mean, he ain't wrong on the $2,000 chassis thing. But I guess to round up a little bit of what we were talking about, you had mentioned earlier complications of generational rift, where an older generation owns a vehicle and then people like us, younger generation folk, are now trying to buy them. And I want to bring this up before you get into this, is that my dad actually dealt with this because, again, he's an older guy. He was into his muscle cars and everything else. And he ended up having to pay a lot more money for some of the parts and whatnot that he went into. He had a truck project back in the day that he was trying to put I want to say it was a Chevelle motor into. He talked about it briefly with us at the table one time because we were discussing our Evo Swap 240. And we noticed that he himself also had issues trying to get parts for these vehicles because here he is as a young man in his mid-20s in the 80s and 90s trying to do a swap from a car that is 20 years old, like ours.
Same too.
And they're having problems. He's having problems trying to get the parts from some of these owners, such as the motor. If I remember, he had to work for it, actually. He wouldn't sell it to him off right. Yeah. So it's like, that's a whole other generational thing, the whole working to get your parts from somebody. But seeing how that has been a trend amongst the car community, how does it look to you now in our modern era?
Well, I feel like the difference between from Silent Gen to Baby Boomers is I should feel like things were a little more mundane than they are now because with all the media presence of, people buying cars, destroying cars, driving cars, just all the...
Basically the road killers.
All the immediate exposure we have now, the rift is... It's the same. It's just the stigma is stronger. I go to buy... For instance, I'm looking at a 928 Porsche. It's exactly what I want, but I can't get there until a certain time, and I'm the first contact that the guy has as a seller. Well, he goes ahead and sells it out from under me without any notification to me saying, hey, do you want to raise? Do you want to fold? What do you want to do? Do you want to bid up this car or anything?
Yeah.
And that kind of gets to me because there's definitely a stigma of, this guy's going to hoon it, all this.
How old were you at the time?
This was recently.
So this is 21. Recent. So you're 21.
Yeah, and I've got,
And the guy sold it out from under you to someone considerably older? I'm assuming.
I would assume, too, because it happened so quickly. We had a day scheduled for me to come see it and give him a cashier's check. I did not make myself out to be a tire kicker. I'm going to New York from Northern Virginia. I made that very clear. And I've done this before. I got an Audi that way.
Is this upstate New York or is this the city?
This is like statewide, western.
So we're talking Ithaca. So the Albany-ish area, which is traditionally an older crowd. Yeah. I used to live in New York. I would know this. So,
but the point is that there's a stigma against selling younger folks cars because of the assumption that they're not going to survive our ownership.
You want to know? I think attributes to that, and I hate to
cue whistling diesel clip.
Yeah, you want to know what I think really kind of attributes that to our generation? We're the first generation to experience cheap Honda ownership.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Okay. And unfortunately, that's a stigma on us, and that's why a lot of, especially us Asian car enthusiasts, that's why a lot of us deal with stigma from older guys who have American cars that maybe we're trying to get into for whatever reason. I feel like that started the trend that put us on this path that we're on now, where they're not going to take care of it. Look at these people.
Or you can't appreciate the worth of the car
because you just had this. I feel like that alone is part of the issue, even amongst our own communities, as the older sells to the younger, and the whole passing of the torch kind of thing goes on, is because I feel like they have it in their heads that, this guy, we can't trust him because he's not going to know, he's not going to care.
Yeah, but that's just the thing, is you make an assumption. You don't know what I'm about. I'm into preservation. Sure, I'm modifying my car, but my 924S, I have a couple Porsches. Let's get that out of the way. My 924S...
21, and he's like, I have a couple Porsches, no big deal. And then we're over here like, I can't even afford one.
It's really not, because it's all about shop maintenance costs that you void by doing the work yourself, but I digress. The point being is I brought a car back from 11 years of sitting under a tarp in Florida. Never ran.
Isn't
all
that your
the belts were
Scirocco?
sour. No, the Scirocco was like 8 months sitting.
Okay.
But the 924 I had sat for 11 years. The fuel system was trashed. I did all the work to it myself. Never set rubber on the ground in a shop. And the thing, it has its issues here and there. It's got a lean running issue, but you're never, I learned so much from that car, and it's alive. It wouldn't be alive right now, or if it was alive. And I'm a little pissed off at the older generation too, because all I do is get on an ownership, like a 944 owners group on Facebook, and
you're probably the youngest person in that group.
Generally, no, but the older folks, it's like, I brought my car out for the first time this year, and it's May now. Your belts have formed to the shape of the pulleys. Your tires have dry rotted, and you're not, if you don't drive the car once a month, then I'm not saying you don't deserve it, but you gotta figure out what you're gonna do with this car. You gotta pickle it and store it, or you gotta, you have it, great. What's the car meant to do? Drive. It's a nice piece to look at. A 928 has a nice booty, but it looks really good on the road when it's moving. That's what it's meant to do. If it's not serving its purpose, you're really depriving. Again, I don't see any of them on the road, and that just pains me, because
they're beautiful machines meant to be driven.
They're beautiful in motion.
See,
that's what I want.
Here's what I find, and this you can agree or disagree, but this is a personal opinion. It's something I've noticed, is that when the owner is mechanically inclined, not just a fan of cars, but is a true to form gearhead, they tend to start the car every couple weeks to make sure the belts don't stick and everything else. They will service it, or they will winterize the cars themselves and all that stuff. If you have just someone who owns a car, you'll run into what you're talking about a lot. And I say this as someone who... I grew up in an old house. I'll be the first to say it. My grandparents, when I was born, were about going into their 60s, right? So they were older. Stuff like, you can drink the NOS on camera, fam. It's okay. All right?
I don't want somebody to come after me.
Oh, my goodness. Anyway. But it's the point of, being around that. Because, like, my grandfather was a stock car driver. His helmet's sitting on the shelf right there, right? He would winterize his car on his own. Now, granted, he owned a Grand Marquis, and it's not necessarily a high-end car or anything like that, but he did it with everything. He did it with everything he owned. From the two-door Ford sedan that he drove to the 57 that ultimately ended his racing career because of a snap steering column and his brakes failing. 70 miles an hour straight into a wall. Ow. How he got out of that, given that level of protection, we don't know.
God's good graces.
Absolutely. But the point is that he was mechanically inclined, so he took care of his cars and he did everything he needed to. But then you have other people, which I won't name, that are just fans of cars and they don't know how to do anything with it. Oil change or tires or belts, regardless. They just don't know how to do any of that stuff because they rely on shops. Yeah. I feel like ownership like that is what leads to these types of gaps.
Yeah, and it's all right to be that kind of owner a little bit.
As an Evo owner, I see this, right? Because there are people who gave the Evo a bad rep because they're like, oh, it's, it breaks all the time, whatever, it cranks. It's like, no, it's maintenance. If you maintain the car, it'll be all right. Now, yes, Evos 1 through 4 had crankwalk issues, and they were fixed later. Or no, it was just the 4, right?
Just the 4, because the 4 was the first iteration of that.
The modern setup. 63, where they flipped it all around.
And Mitsubishi outsourced that oil pump.
Yeah. Once they made their own, never a single problem.
Yep.
Huh. It's weird how it happens that way, but it did. The point is they were given such a bad rap by people who owned them and didn't understand what the cars really were. Like, I saw videos where a guy complained that it didn't have cruise control. First and foremost, it's a rally car first, and then a street car. It's a homologation special, basically. So, How are you going to complain about it not having cruise control when you don't have enough space in the woods, Colin McRae, to put it into cruise control? You're too busy doing this to make sure that it stays in gear and stays in power. You don't have the space for it. Yeah. Now, the MRs, they did come out with a 6-speed so that you could highway cruise it, but it was originally meant for mountain driving and rallycross type stuff. Race car. Cruise control modules would slow the thing down. Yeah. That's why a lot of guys end up deleting their AC systems, because the compressors put too much strain on the motor, killing almost half of its power. They only had AC motors on them, just so that people who don't understand what the car is could still feel somewhat normal.
It was marketability too.
Yeah, because you look at the RS chassis, and that was entirely what it was meant for. No power, anything. Windows, ABS, none of it. Not even a radio, and an aluminum roof instead of the full steel or glass filled because of sunroofs. That thing was dumb light. I think it was like 400, 500 pounds lighter than your GS model or GSR model.
That's very appreciable.
Yeah, and unfortunately they're very hard to find, those shells now, so good luck finding one. And they do have fat amounts of inflation because of it, because most of them took those things and went straight to the shop with it. Can't blame them on that one.
Yeah, no, there are some instances where it's right. Like, honestly, I know a lot of people who do work on their 928s, but I'm guessing that a lot of the ownership also has no idea what that wiring harness looks like and probably can't decipher the shop manual. And that's nothing against them. It's quite challenging. And even my young, flexible mind struggles with it. But
German things.
I mean, let's be real. Yeah. Germany is notorious for engineering nightmares and successes.
Yeah.
Then
the 928's a mix of
pump in BMWs here. Here, we have an electrical issue. Well, why is it that whenever the wiper module stops working, I can't start the car? Oh, because Germany. I've seen
all
that.
My friends have said. It's the engine that never breaks.
It's everything else around it that fails.
No, that's very true.
Those E30s, though.
Yeah. If we could get our hands on an E30 or, what was it, 318? I would 318.
Yeah.
I would be okay with it, mostly because a buddy of mine owned one, and he drove that thing for, I want to say, 250,000 miles without a single problem.
Yeah, jeez. A good owner can make a car go, and to that point, let me one-up you. The 924.
Your truck, how it's somehow still alive. Your little Ford Ranger at 330,000 miles, and it still somehow turns on.
What's a Ford?
No, it's the 4-cylinder.
It's the bad Ford.
It's the bad 4-cylinder.
Oh, which one? The 2.3?
Which one?
It was. I think it's like a 04.
It's
Ford
an
Ranger.
older one, and
it's the bad 4-cylinder.
It's
the
one
one that
they're
loses
notorious.
compression when you go up the hill.
There it is.
The Ford Ranger that my aunt drives is, like he said, 330,000 miles. It's
How
still
it kicks.
going. It makes all kinds of noises, and I'm just waiting for the sidewall to blow out.
It's amazing how that thing keeps running, but again, it shows that maintenance keeps a car alive.
It's like my 240.
Yeah, the right owner can
dude,
make
240s are
reliable.
notorious for breaking in different ways, whether it's the wiring harness getting chopped, because I don't know why they put the whole harness through the door hinge, but they did.
That's the body harness. The wiring harness actually...
Okay, body harness goes through the side of the car where the door meets the thing, so if you get into a fender bender, you might lose everything from basically the front side of the car back will just no longer work.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of how it's set up, which is stupid, but it made sense in a tiny car like that. But like cars like that were notorious for problems. KA's blowing up and all of this stuff.
Well, especially
and then
nowadays.
here you have a 240,000 mile motor. Is that right?
I'm not entirely sure how many miles are on that motor. I had it in my S14.
The only problem he has is it overheats too much.
Not anymore.
We did fix it, but
that's
it was like a
not an issue.
6-month ordeal.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about that. But no, I daily drove that thing when it was in my S14 for a year, and I daily drove it when it was in my S13 for a year. I've daily driven that motor for 2 years.
And now it's going to end up inside of the D21 in his house.
Yeah, and it'll get daily driven then.
Yep, because that'll be the workhorse. So the point is that maintenance is ultimately, I think, the key, and that's part of the issue with this inflation is you don't know on a lot of these. And some people are just
Yeah, you buy
offering
used
up their
car.
garbage as if it's gold, and some people are offering up their gold as if it's garbage, and it's causing an inconsistency within the market.
Yeah, no low ballers. I know what I got. Or it's like you find a lot of cars.
that on the posts.
You find a lot of cars that it's like, oh, it needs this, that. I have all the parts. Okay.
So why didn't you do it?
It's not
Yeah.
worth it.
Oh, it's not worth it. Okay, well, if it's not worth it to you, then why are you selling it to me?
Project, you know.
Yeah.
It depends though, because I'm talking about a specific example being an AMC. There's no market for AMCs, which
That's
is,
because that market died like 20 years ago.
and it's a niche market.
Very much a niche market.
It died when it should have.
But
If you caught that, he said it died when it should have.
I don't know. I kind of like.
Hey, man,
sometimes.
Gremlins are cool cars when they have actually reliable motors inside of
So
them.
now less.
Hey, they had a 258 straight six. You can't tell me a Jeep six banger ain't reliable.
He's not wrong, because I've watched a Jeep last 300,000 miles, too.
You're
Yeah.
not wrong, but I'd pull that and put a different straight six in it.
But
First-
the end, yeah. Okay,
We all
yeah,
know that you would put a
1J.
Japanese, like a 1J or a 2J, maybe even an RB block in there.
But the end.
I would go
2J.
Ford.
Point,
I would go Ford
yeah.
bottom, just to be a little bit higher on the displacement.
You want to know what? I would do the Ford bar.
Just because it's different in the fact that
But
it's a
technically
4
that's an
liter.
import
And it can
motor.
make more power. I'm gonna
Considerably.
piss off so many Supra fanboys.
Oh my god. And the best part is it's a 4 liter. It's practically a muscle block at that point. You just bore it out just a little bit and suddenly you have the same displacement as an early LS model. 4.6 liters.
There's
or
a
modular.
4-liter LS, isn't there?
That was the
4.3.
small block, right?
4.3.
I'm not as well versed in this, though. This is all you.
Dude, we're still gonna have to chop this up. No, that's
Oh no,
Robbie.
this is all fitting though. Because
That's
it
Robbie
proves,
again because he needs to. I don't know any. I do blue oval.
Fair enough. But the thing is that, again, kind of circling back to the niche market thing, like, niche market cars, our cars will eventually be there because of the market pool drying up. So what does that look like for us moving forward? This will be like the last bit of our discussion here, so I hope you guys have stuck around for this long. But when it comes to the niche stuff, like, Evos are already there, which is why their cost has kind of remained consistent over the last 3 or 4 years, despite more and more of them ending up at Copart because of wrecker issues, or ending up on auction sites because of repossessions and stuff like that.
Or because they're always owned by like.
Kids who don't know what they're doing.
Or I was gonna say characters. I mean.
Yeah, that's true
Let's
too.
be honest.
That is true too.
And that's a lot of my cards too.
But it goes to show, for at least in our area with the CT chassis, not necessarily the Evo 10, but the 789, that's a very quickly dwindling market. And the thing is because of how, like, their presence landed in the market, a lot of companies like STM and AMS, they've made motor parts for them, bottom end and stuff like that. ARP made stud bolts and kit bolts basically for everything on that block, so you can have those parts there and know that they won't break. Like, companies like that came alongside it because of their presence in certain areas of motorsport, specifically drag, because the Eclipse was the first variation of the 4063T that we got in the States. With the presence of the Eclipse kind of helping solidify the 4063 as a motor, it's going to help a lot with the aftermarket support for the Evo and have it continue on for a long time. And also, they're still making the 4063. It's being sold in China in their copy version of the Land Rovers. I don't remember the name of the company. I think it's something
Ely.
Wind or something like that makes it. But the point is there's still support for it. So how does that, like, with cars that didn't make as big a splash, such as Porsches and Audis,
well,
in the early forms anyway.
Yeah. Older niche market cars. There are a couple. Let's say Opel GTs fit in this category. Opels in general, Cadets. I would say like Isuzu iMarks and
Good
stuff
luck
like that.
finding Isuzu parts.
Yeah.
But niche markets are interesting because you're going to find a lot of good chassis and a lot of bad chassis. Because they never, they just sat in fields instead of getting crushed. Because people wanted to do something with them but never did. Specific example, Audi, we'll call them cars. You are, Quattros, S cars, the original series where the motor's all the way forward of the front axle, and it's the classic super robust Quattro drivetrain. If I told you to look for an Audi 200 Turbo Quattro or like a 100 or an 80 or a 90, you're not going to find anything.
No.
Because they're just not, they've all either rusted away or Subaru Brat for that matter too.
Oh, I forgot about the Subaru Brat.
That
My
existed.
uncle had one.
That's a super niche market in of itself, a boxer truck. But
Yeah, or like AMC Eagles. Seem to be trending 4x4 in all-wheel drive here, but I digress.
But how does, like, because of how narrow that market is, even with the availability, like how narrow it is, how do you feel like the cost for that stuff is going to change or shift?
It really stagnates. Because most of those markets where the car is a USDM issue of a foreign-produced vehicle, you're going to be able to get parts just a little more slowly and from intercontinental sources.
Yeah.
You're going to have to look at people who just bring parts over in bulk and buy them there, like
So you
Auto
feel,
House or places that specify in that car. But they're always going to be reasonable because you're like one of 500 people buying things for an 89 Turbo TQ 200.
So you feel like that plateauing is eventually going to happen.
Yeah, and they may see the same rise that, say, the 944 did, and the 944 could have classified like this because it was kind of weird in its own market. It was never quite as niche as the Quattros are now, but generally they stay about the same level. They don't do much, just because nobody's looking for them. For instance, I picked up an 89 200 Turbo Quattro, 103,000 miles, odometer still rolling, needed a timing belt and water pump like all German cars do when you pick them up.
Or Asian.
Or it has a couple boost leaks and people don't go through the problem the logical way, and so people get frustrated with them. That's why a car becomes niche, is because there's something that isn't compelling enough for you to fix, but it's annoying enough that you don't want the car anymore.
Makes
in my
sense.
case, vacuum line, just done, boosts properly now. Kind of missed the overboost, made a lot more power before fuel cut. But probably not that good for the head bolts.
Makes sense.
And so those cars always have, it's a car that's going to have minor problems that most people don't figure are worth fixing.
Fair.
And they just kind of sit in the field. And you pick it up for $1,700. You learn the car through whatever rare sources you have, and now you've got an example of a car that's not going to be that valuable, but you can do whatever you want with it. And that's the beauty of a niche car, is you can hard drive that Quattro. That drivetrain will survive anything you throw at it.
Yeah. I mean, it was a Group B choice for a reason.
Yeah, there's a reason they won manufacturers' championships twice.
I feel like we're going to wrap it up here. I think the basic gist is there's a lot of problems that the car community is going to face in the near future. But at the same time, there will be an eventual resolve that'll just be a constant, right? A plateau, if you will. The question then is, where does it go from there as markets dry out? That's going to be a discussion for another day. Hope you guys have enjoyed our conversation here today, and thank you guys for coming on board with this, because normally it's just me sitting up here.
Of course.
But with that said, got a lot coming down the pipeline on the main content, the main car rant stuff, so definitely stick around for it. Board G63 Turbo 240 stuff happening in the near future. Hope you guys will stick around for that. God bless y'all, and we'll see you next time. Peace.